So this session will go until about 1 o'clock, and we're going to be discussing an overview of trends, visitation, and management from the industry and user perspective for this session. And so I will now pass it over to the session moderator, who's Mike Munoz.
Thank you, Holly. Appreciate that. And welcome back, everyone. Really good job, Jen Thompson and our manager panel for kicking us off. Way to rise to that challenge. And our challenge now for the second panel and helping set the tone for what we'll be covering the next several days. We'll be talking through lunch. And so hopefully many of you got some snacks and you're ready to listen in on this great group of folks from industry and user groups to help get an idea about the trends that we're going to see. We have a really wide array or myriad of people representing this panel from British Columbia and Alberta, as well as Montana, as well as from the standpoint of protected areas and developed areas, and as well as folks that have more traditional use and a more mechanized motorized use. We are missing one panelist. And so in talking with my panelists earlier a few weeks ago, we were going to try to hit 6 to 7 minutes. We're going to have more like 7 to 8 minutes. So when you get to that 7-minute part, I'll kind of give you a signal just to make sure we keep things rolling along. And if there's any clarifying comments after each panelist, we'll go ahead and have Holly look at that in the chat. If you have a clarifying point that you want to cover with that panelist right then, we'll do that. But otherwise, we're just going to go presenter to presenter, just like Jen did. And then at the end, I hope to have some specific questions for our panelists, as well as then some general ones, and turn it over to our participants in this year's forum for recreation. And I'm hoping that the managers are sticking around because we have a great array of speakers here. So I'm going to allow them, much as Jen did, to introduce themselves. And we're going to start off just like the agenda shows with Maggie Carr. So have at it, Maggie.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'm going to get my PowerPoint going here. Just a second. Okay, there we go. As Mike said, my name's Maggie, Maggie Carr, and I co-own Dropstone Outfitting with Eve Bardwell, which we founded in 2012, and we're based out of Choteau, Montana. We both grew up along the east side of the Rocky Mountain front, and we now operate our business in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Our specialty is stock supported hiking trips, which means we pack your gear on horses and mules and you hike with our guides, and all you have to do is carry a day pack. We lead between 10 to 12 trips annually. And let's see, our business model is unique in the Bob Marshall, as we are one of the few outfitters permitted specifically for hiking trips versus the traditional horseback outfitted trips. Our trips generally include 8 clients, 4 staff, around 8 head of stock, and they're anywhere from 5 to 10 days. And my PowerPoint is not moving. There we go. There's a picture of us. Because we have fewer numbers of stock than traditional outfitted trips, and because we are primarily hiking based, we have more flexibility in the itineraries that we choose. We also like to try new things. This year we're doing a yoga trip. In the past, we've done naturalist trips. We did a climate change trip with Steve Running. And then the last couple of years, we've started to do a little bit of guided archery hunting in the fall. Our primary clients are baby boomers, although we do have a few other younger folks that like to join us. Also, we have primarily Montanans that join us, anywhere from 60 to 70%. And our clients are simply wonderful people. They value wildness and adventure as much as we do, so we feel pretty lucky. So talking a little bit about trends here, through the years, our trips have filled quicker and quicker every year. And however, the last 2 years, things have really taken off. There's a picture of our string. For 2021, we were fully booked for the season 2 days after we opened up our reservations. This year, we were fully booked in 1 minute. The overarching trend I see both in bookings and the number of folks I see out on the trail is not a secret to any of us. We are seeing an incredible increase in interest in outdoor recreation. Last year, I saw people in places I rarely saw them in the past. Trailheads had no parking. I observed new campsite development, new fire rings, more garbage. And I heard this mentioned in the last presentation, but it's true. There's a lot more human waste throughout the backcountry. I think there's 2 groups of people that the new increased use can be broken down into. You've got your new user, and they're seeking outdoor rec at a higher rate than ever before, partially, I think, because of the ability to access information so easily through the map apps, through route information on websites, et cetera. Also because of the higher prevalence of Garmin InReach-like devices, satellite communication devices that make people feel more comfortable back in the mountains. And then you've got your second group of users who are the people who are returning, and they're doing it with a get it while you can mentality. So they're revisiting more frequently. For us, this translates into people who are willing to book out further and pay more. They're just they're having to plan ahead and they're doing it. And we don't like to increase our prices. I mean, we like to make money, but we don't like to increase our prices. And this has been a dilemma for us because, we want to make trips affordable to a wider range of people. However, with demand, we've had to increase our prices, and it doesn't seem like this is dissuading any of our returning clients. Let's see, here's a picture of a trip we did along the Rocky Mountain front, looking south towards Ear Mountain there. Personally, as a business owner, I'm both happy for the growth and also wary of the impacts of increased use in the Bob and in other areas. For me, the Bob and the surrounding area has always represented the ideal of wildness, untrammeled landscapes, abundant wildlife, and a legacy of wildlife conservation. Simply a place where humans are more visitor than inhabitant. I do feel like the face of that's changing a little bit. And we're starting to run into things like people having external speakers on their backpacks as you're going down the trail, more human waste, more conflict between user groups. The very idea of what we're selling to clients is beginning to change a little bit. And so I am a little bit aware of my own, or maybe a lot aware of my own hypocrisy. We make money off of selling people trips, and we benefit from the increased use, but I both want more people and don't want more people to come to this area. And I think many folks feel that double-edged sword of the popularity of outdoor use. And so as far as our permitting goes, the Forest Service has been great to work with. And I think one of my biggest concerns about permitting going forward is that with increased use, managers will put more and more restrictive measures on outfitters without addressing the increase of public use. I see this as a major land management issue that will need to be addressed nationally. I think it's time for people to pay to play. Outside of hunting and fishing, there's no universal way for funds to be raised to increase management in accordance with increased use. I also feel the need to have a bigger presence of managers in the Forest Service in the Bob to help educate new users. I think a lot of it's about educating users on how to do better leave no trace camping, how to do bear hangs properly, etc. There's a nice little campfire picture for you.
About 1 more minute, Maggie.
Okay. So overall, I wanted to say, I think an increase in recreation use is here to stay. For our business, it's good. For our local communities, it's good. For people's physical and mental health, it's good. However, I think for the places that we love, it's not always quite so good. There is such a thing as loving a place to death. That's where the recreate responsibly message and an increase in management and recreation education comes into play. And I think there's an opportunity right now to get out ahead of some of these growth trends and to manage for impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Any clarifying questions in the chat, Holly?
No, I'm not seeing any in the chat right now.
Excellent. And so we'll wait for Maggie there to get her PowerPoint down. And next up on our panel is Jason Crawford. So Jason.
Hi, how you doing?
Excellent.
Okay, my name is Jason Crawford. I'm the Director of Mountain Operations here at Castle Mountain Resort. And our promise is to deliver a uniquely unfiltered skiing experience that's just as nature intended, while remaining firmly rooted in the community. We strongly believe in conservation and protecting and respecting the environment that we work and play within. We're a bit of a throwback ski resort. We have older fixed grip lifts. One of our ticket checkers, her name is Huggy Marie. She checks your ticket and then gives you a hug. Anyone who's ever been to Castle knows that we are not Disneyland, and rest assured we have no intentions on becoming anything that resembles that. We're located at the headwaters of the Castle River on the Old Man watershed, just north of Waterton Lakes National Park. We're surrounded by Castle Provincial Park, Castle Wildland Park, and if that isn't enough regulatory bodies, we also share a property line with the Castle Ecological Reserve, which has the highest level of protection in Alberta. And it's just on the downriver side of us to keep things nice and challenging. We currently have about 200 shareholders, mostly are homeowners of the resort or locals, and we have approximately 200 employees. We are the largest private employer in the MD of Pincher Creek. And we're also one of the largest tax generators for the MD as well. Castle Mountain Resort privately owns approximately 45 acres of land that's in our base area. We have a public land lease of approximately 3,200 acres, which the majority is where ski trails are located on. We kind of operate a small municipality in a sense at the base of the resort, delivering water, drinking water, wastewater, road maintenance and snow plowing. Our public land lease currently allows us commercial activity in the winter season. However, we're only able to apply for temporary field authorizations and TFAs for activities such as weddings and our annual Summer Huckleberry Festival, as well as snow storage, which is a little bit of a strange one. So those are things we're allowed to do in the summer. We do work with 2 third-party operators, Uplift Adventures. They teach backcountry courses and do guided hiking programs, as well as Center Peak High Country Adventures, who provide horseback riding tours. Their access to our lease is controlled by our public land managers on when they're allowed to operate and not allowed to operate. CMR, as ourselves, we are not permitted to commercially operate these types of activities due to the nature of our lease being winter only. There is a major access point to the Castle Wildland Park that basically leaves our parking lot. There is really no actual trailhead per se, or in the traditional sense. According to Alberta Parks, users are supposed to ask permission before parking on our private property. That doesn't really happen, and it also puts us in a bit of an awkward position, because it probably wouldn't look very good if we restricted access to park users and said, no, you can't park here. But we are responsible for maintenance, snow removal, security, and waste removal for those users. In the summer, Alberta Parks promotes hiking trails that are on our leased lands, which adds a little bit of challenge to managing the public while they're on this trail without the proper trailhead. Our staff end up kind of working as a bit of a visitor center, as there's not really a visitor center for the Castle Parks area. We do operate a pub on the weekends, and we've recently purchased the Castle Ski Lodge Hotel and Hostel, which is located here in our base area. And this gives us an opportunity to monetize some of these challenges, which we hope we can do better at into the future. We do have open and very productive dialogue with governments within parks and environment and parks on how we can better work together to offset some of these challenges. We completed a master development plan about 5 years ago, working with Alberta Environment and Parks now on what the next steps are for approvals, what does and what does not fall under an environmental impact assessment, and then how we can prioritize how we move forward into the future. So that's a bit about who Castle is and who we are, and maybe getting a little bit more into the guts of this forum. We've noticed some real changes in our customers and what their wishes and demands are. In the past 10 years, we've seen a real shift of customers moving. They're looking for adventures. They don't really want the cookie cutter experience, which Castle definitely is not cookie cutter. They want adventure. They want to experience and explore the backcountry. They have, gear and toys is very, very highly important to them, and it's almost like part of their identity. We've seen more and more young families moving to the mountains. They want to participate in activities together versus more of the traditional team organized sports where the families stand back and watch their kids. They're into hiking, mountain biking, camping in the summer, and skiing, snowshoeing, fat biking, and snowmobiling in the winter. And they're demanding 4-season access from Castle Mountain Resort and in the Castle Park area. So they want 4-season access, attractions, and activities. With COVID, we've seen our business take a dramatic change from rules and regulations and mandates, but also it's affected our business volumes in a positive way, and probably our staffing and supply chains definitely in a negative way. So those have been real challenges for us. The last year, we were 20% busier than our previous record year. And this current year is, right now, it's trending to be our second busiest year in our history, despite opening 2 weeks later than planned and dealing with extreme cold snaps on both Christmas and family week vacation periods. It's still just, today's a powder day and it's just packed out there. We've seen real estate sales from the private people that have homes here at the base of the resort. That's changed dramatically. We used to see maybe 2-3 properties change hands a year. Now we're seeing like 15 to 20 have changed hands since the beginning of COVID. And that's kind of creating another shift is people want to use their mountain homes versus putting it into a rental pool or looking at it as an investment. And this poses a challenge for staff housing that we already had a challenge with, I think, as one of the land managers talked about earlier, with like VRBOs and Airbnbs, and now this is also affecting destination visitors because there's nowhere for them to stay when they come here. Change is always a scary thing for both people, local and guests alike. This added volumes, it does help us upgrade our existing facilities. Our facilities are definitely aging, and we do need to invest in capital into this resort. But it's also helping us grow a little bit better to accommodate our growing guests and homeowner groups. So
about 1 more minute there, Jason.
Okay, I'll go quick. Having more 4-season visitation allows us to keep more staff on year round and to better effectively use our facilities. We don't want to become Disneyland, as I said earlier. We want to remain true to who we are. So our base area is governed by an area structure plan, which is developed by the MD. It puts restrictions on development and ties things to wastewater. People seem to have this thing about wanting to use the bathroom. We need to be able to handle and treat that. From a provincial point of view, having access to our lease in the summer is critical. We're working with environment parks as well as Alberta Parks on how we can best do this, what the scope is for an EIA, and what have you. We're pretty unique in Alberta. Alberta is really good at coal extraction, or I should just say land extraction, like anything coal, oil and gas, forestry. Running ski resorts, we're the only one that kind of operates in our environment. I guess closing really quickly, I think the most key thing is making sure you have respectful communication and you build relationships with both your community, your user groups, but just as importantly with land managers, be them municipal, local, provincial, it doesn't really matter, but we need to be successful together in growing the economy, recreational opportunities, but at the same time, we need to be very wary and of protecting and respecting the landscape in our winter environments.
Thank you, Jason. You're a bit bigger than I had realized compared to our little ski area west of Shoto here. So
Yeah, we're by acreage, we're the second largest in Alberta, so we're
all right.
pretty big, but we're small.
Thank you. So next up on our panelist is Amanda Goodhue.
Hey, yeah, I'll just try to get some slides going here.
Okay, we'll let you know if we see them. And there they are.
Perfect. Perfect, got it full screen there. Okay, awesome. So I guess I'll start with a quick who we are. So I'm sort of here on behalf of the United Riders of Crowsnest Mountain Bike Club in Crowsnest Pass, Alberta, which was started in 2008. I'm currently the trail coordinator for the club, but I have sort of recently taken on that role. I've only been doing it for about a year. Before that, we had a very dedicated trail coordinator who did this stuff for years. We're a volunteer-based not-for-profit group. Some of our main focuses are advocacy, fundraising, trail building and maintenance, and also the occasional bike event in the community. So starting with a few big picture trends, we, like so many places have already mentioned today, have seen a dramatic increase in traffic on trails. So we're pretty lucky to have consistent data gathered from trail counters in one of our trail networks in Blairmore since 2014, using infrared trail counters. And then we had a couple more added in 2017 when we built a new trail and added some to that. So we've seen a pretty consistent rise in our daily average, which is what that graph is showing over the years. And then I think it's a really great graph to show the surge that we had in 2020 due to COVID-19. So from 2019 to 2020, we saw our numbers go up by 67%, which was very similar to what so many areas saw in terms of people coming in higher numbers. And then this year we saw actually a fairly steady number compared to 2020. So from 2020 to 2021, we were wondering if we'd sort of maintain that level or if it would go down, and it actually ended up staying similar and growing just slightly. The graph there shows a bit of an anomaly in the top green line because we actually lost a month of data on one of our counters in our peak season. So that drop is actually kind of non-existent, but it's there at the moment. And we've noticed that the traffic coming to the area has been both people moving here and people coming to visit from other places. As places closer to city centers have become busier, people have sort of moved out a little farther and looked for other places to go. And our trail traffic data at this particular trail network shows pretty big spikes of trail traffic on weekends as well. So lots more traffic coming in on the weekends. And then just sort of like an overall trend in terms of traffic increase too is probably improving technology in mountain bikes, which has been mentioned a couple of times already today, and especially the trend of e-bikes sort of being a new trend for land managers to consider. So in our experience, what are mountain bikers asking for? So in general, people are looking for purpose-built single track trails that provide fun, challenge, and options for progressing skills. There's a demand for trails that are accessible right from town, sort of all abilities. So right from beginner up to expert trails, and especially trails that can be ridden by many different abilities in a fun way. So offering like progression through learning and skills. We've also seen a lot of kids on bikes. So a demand is definitely there for sort of shorter, easy loops for kids to access, and also sort of demand for dirt bike or dirt jump parks and skills parks and stuff like that in the community that that provide a place for them to go. And then there's also a segment of the mountain bike population that's looking for sort of longer rides that get them farther away from town and provide maybe a bit more physical challenge than the shorter, close to town trails. And then with increasing traffic on trails, there's also a demand for directional trails. So trails that are either uphill or downhill designated. And we've found that that's a great way to manage traffic and enhance rider experiences, as well as to sort of increase safety as the number of riders on the trails continues to increase. And then just a few local community changes that we have noticed over the last little while. One thing is a trend of people moving to the Crowsnest Pass for the recreation opportunities. And that's not necessarily mountain biking alone. It's hiking, it's fishing, it's all the other activities that have been already mentioned today as well. And we've noticed this, especially as COVID-19 allows people to work more remotely. So talking to people on trails, we've found that lots of people are moving down here now that they're able to work outside of the city and be closer to recreation opportunities. And something that's also been mentioned earlier today is the increasing number of people buying vacation homes here, and also homes to be sort of short-term rentals as well. Increasing visitor numbers have helped support the opening and success of businesses. We've noticed more sort of outdoor stores and restaurants and things like that popping up in town and being very successful. And then in general, the mountain bike community has embraced the increase in traffic on trails, but it's definitely created a demand for more trails, so more areas for people to go and spread out. And then it's also worth noting that a lot of our areas are multi-use. So people, the trails often get lots of people walking and running and hiking on them as well. And then we've seen a few minor issues in the community lately, especially in the last 2 years, as our traffic has sort of skyrocketed in terms of trailhead parking. That's been one of the major sort of issues we've had to tackle, is people sort of overflowing onto community streets and things like that. Whether it's trailhead parking that's too small, or just a sort of lack of trailhead parking in some areas. And we've sort of found that that social media and trail forks have been really good ways to get the message out, and we've had pretty good success at sort of managing our crowds and our people that way.
Okay, Amanda, are you about near the wrapping up?
Yes, right there actually.
Ah, excellent.
So
Very
yeah,
good.
that's a quick overview of the a couple of the things that we've noticed. And yeah, interestingly, sort of quite a few similarities to things earlier today.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm guessing no clarifying questions in the chat. And so next up on our list of panelists be Brad Harrison. Brad, I know you have a PowerPoint you're going to share.
I am. Are you seeing it?
Yes, got it.
All righty, just gonna get going here. So I'm Brad Harrison, and I'm from, well, I'm originally from Invermere, which is just up the valley, and I'm now in Kamloops, in the traditional unceded territory of the Secwepemc people. And I originally looked at this, and I was going to do a little more of a local presentation, but I thought I'd spread this to the Adventure Tourism Coalition, which is something that a couple of us initiated, and it's spread all across, basically all across BC, probably more the southern area. It represents a very diverse and disparate group of sectors for sure, and they're about as far apart as you can get. We have bear viewers, and we have the guide no fitter anglers of BC. So some people want to shoot bears, some people want to take pictures of them. The whole thing that worked for us was getting people into the same tent and understanding that we have many things that there's commonalities in, and that's how we started working together. That was in 2016. And actually, I just want to say I wish we had as much snow as you have in Castle. It's actually 14 degrees in Kamloops yesterday, so we don't have a lot of snow. We're missing that. As I said before, it was unprecedented. Typically in BC, the adventure tourism sectors did not work together. They worked individually. And actually, you okay with the picture, Mike? Sorry, good. Okay. So we actually used the model of the Council of Forest Industries and tried to come together and go to government with one or two messages. One of the commonalities of everybody in our group in British Columbia is that they get some kind of land permission from, in Canada and BC, it's called the Crown, which would be like United States, you'd have the BLM land and that kind of thing. And those things would come from two different ministries, the Ministry of Environment, which would be typically BC Parks, that kind of thing. And the other one would be Ministry of Forests, which would get adventure tourism tenures. It's interesting for us is that that ministry has just changed. They just calved off the Ministry of Forests to a new ministry called Lands, Water and Resource Stewardship, which we have conveniently called Land Wars, which is kind of what it's going to look like. And so we're hoping that the tenures, the tourism tenures will end up getting a little more, we'll call it street cred, because they actually provide socioeconomic value to particularly to rural areas in BC, where typically resource extraction, very similar to Alberta, has typically been the big dog. And just by the numbers here, you can see how big the adventure tourism industry is to British Columbia. These are pre-COVID, so a little bit of a rider on those, but we expect them to go back to the same numbers. 18.4 billion is a big number. So this is just some general metrics on what the adventure tourism economy on its own supports. So this isn't overall tourism. This is just adventure tourism. So all those different sectors that we had in that second slide. So again, big numbers, almost all of rural British Columbia, which is, we kind of have two economies in BC. We have Victoria, Vancouver, and we have rural BC. So two different economies going on. And you can see by the numbers here on this slide, just how important adventure tourism is in the overall visitor spending numbers. So we're ahead of forestry, just slightly behind oil and gas. And those numbers, our numbers particularly, are going uphill, right? Whereas some of the more traditional resource extraction numbers are going downhill. We're still not there. One of the real pushes and challenges for us, and just a note of note too, in the Adventure Tourism Coalition, there are two public facing bodies as well as Indigenous Tourism BC. So it's not all commercial rec. So we have Mountain Bike Tourism Association and we have the BC Snowmobile Federation, which are both public facing organizations. So definitely one of our challenges is try and get the general public and the decision makers to understand the value of adventure tourism and commercial recreation, and try and give us, again, the resources that we need to handle all these things, a bunch of these things that you've brought up earlier, in terms of managing the resource, keeping it pristine, those kind of things. So these two surveys kind of give you a general inclination that the public is finally starting to get it, which eventually will hopefully have the decision makers get that. We try and focus on how we as commercial operators and public groups can try and help educate the public on the importance of the environment and environmental stewardship and that kind of thing. And we think that that is incumbent upon us to be those movers of information, I would call, or make people aware. Also, some other things that we try and focus on is more of a collective. We often hear that the stuff we do is not accessible because of the skill level required to take on these, we'll call it the hard activities in adventure tourism. I actually think it's converse, that when you hire a guide, people that can go might not be able to go to a place actually can, because now they have a guide to take them there. British Columbia, we have a thing called Search and Rescue and the BC Provincial Emergency Program. Adventure tourism operators wholly support that program. When there's a rescue in the backcountry, it's the heli-ski company's helicopter that shows up to pick people out often. So we fully support that. Everybody here is very aware of how important activity in the backcountry is, or general outdoor wilderness recreation. So we support that as well. A lot of British Columbia is having a challenge right now with transition away from resource extraction. We have a lot of mills closing, that kind of thing. So we're trying to soften the blow and try and provide adventure tourism jobs or commercial recreation jobs to help keep those small communities functional. Here's the part for the interesting part and the not so good part. So some challenges, I just broke it into 4 quick slides on challenges. In British Columbia, we were one of the first places to adopt the UNDRIP thing. So we passed legislation called DRIPA, which basically has changed the landscape of how land is allocated in British Columbia. So if you want to go set up a commercial mountain bike company and you want to get a chunk of land, you need to get permission from the First Nations before you even consider going to the BC government. Like, don't even think about it. So in a lot of places, we have a new landlord, and I look at it as an opportunity. Other people think it's a problem, right? They don't want to change. Some other challenges, we have brand new species at risk legislation in British Columbia. It's under the Species at Risk Committee. So the challenge for us, we totally support that, obviously, is how do we manage that species at risk while at the same time having a viable operation? That's the big challenge. You notice I have no answers for these, I just have questions. This has been brought up lots of times on this panel. It's probably surprising to some people, given the size of British Columbia, that we have problems with over tourism and the lack of experience. We're past the experiential carrying capacity. This is in Joffrey Lake, which is just north of Vancouver. You can see the piles of garbage and the 3.4 kilometers of cars parked on Thanksgiving weekend, trying to get to the backcountry. So it's a huge problem.
About 30 more seconds there, Brad.
Perfect. The last one of our challenges for us is just all the problems with climate change. So wildfires, we had a really bad year. We had atmospheric rivers, we had heat domes, we had wildfires. I just have a couple of pictures here from a climbing area I visited. This is over an 18-year span, and you can see the change in the glaciation. Not good. I made it.
Thank you, Brad. Just one clarifying thing for your association for the
Yep.
lodges. How large an area is that you represent? They're spread out.
Like of all the coalition, Mike, or what specifically do you mean?
Your Backcountry Lodges of British Columbia Association.
It's a variety, depends on which lodge. So Helicat Canada, which is the heli ski sector, I think they have over 50% of British Columbia under tenure, right? Whereas the backcountry lodges, which are just a small postage stamp around a backcountry lodge, are going to be quite a bit smaller. They're more like a cat ski operation or maybe even a ski hill operation.
Okay, thank you. All right, next up on the agenda is Bill Hodge.
Thanks, Mike. It would be a cop-out to just say ditto to Maggie's presentation, though it's tempting, and then ditto to Brad's Edward Abbey quote there at the end. But again, hi, everybody. My name is Bill Hodge. I serve as Executive Director of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation and have for the last 3 years. The foundation has been around. There's an attempt to start the foundation in the 1980s, but it really got going in 1997. So 2022 is the 25th anniversary of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation. So we're going to be celebrating big time this year. We are a shoulder-to-shoulder partner with the U.S. Forest Service and its role in managing the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, which is 1.5 million acres. It includes the Bob Marshall, Scapegoat, and Great Bear wilderness areas on the Flathead, Helena, Lewis and Clark, and Lolo National Forest. Foundation was started in no small part by the agency itself and retirees from the agency who had noticed the lack of capacity within the agency to manage the number of volunteer opportunities that would come over the transom to help participating in stewardship of the Bob, and got started really sort of rooted in the idea of helping empower volunteerism in the complex, and specifically working on deferred maintenance issues in the trail system, which includes about 1,700 miles of trails in the complex. And we've kind of grown from there. Last year, as our latest benchmark, we had over 360 volunteers. We worked on over 530 miles of deferred maintenance in the complex. We treated by pulling or spraying over 26 acres of non-native invasive weeds in the complex. And we also engaged in a lot of new work for us, which I will get into shortly, on engaging more diverse communities. When we say we connect Americans to the wilderness heritage, we want that to mean all Americans. And so we have been adding some intentionality to our work, and we do that. Our growth has been pretty steady over the years. COVID was an interesting blip for us. I'm not sure we would have been down in numbers other than about 6 trips into our summer in consultation with the agency. In 2020, we did pull the plug on any of our remaining trips, just out of the effort to be a good citizen during at that time, the just rapid spread of the COVID virus in our communities that surround the complex. We get this work done with a permanent staff of 6, and this summer we'll have a seasonal staff of about 18. And one theme that I want to pick up on something Jack Rich said during the last panel, that is going to continue to be a challenge for us. When we rely on a seasonal workforce as big as that, housing is becoming a real issue for us, as houses are being bought up, put in short-term and long-term rental, as the agency is also staffing up for a variety of things, including the Great American Outdoors Act funds that have become available for the complex. There are fewer and fewer beds to go around for these young people who are coming out here to spend the summer working in the complex. And so that's a real issue that we're going to have to try to figure out how active we can be in solving that challenge of creating these bedroom spots for these crew members and interns when they're not in the backcountry leading these 350 to 400 volunteers every year. Another pinch point for us is that almost all of our trips, and we do about 45 backcountry trips a year into the Bob to do this trail work and weeds work, require the support of stock. And we rely largely on the good-hearted nature of so many backcountry horsemen around the complex. Probably 75% of our trips are supported by volunteer packers. And that's going to be a pinch point both for our current number of trips and as we hope to grow the amount of work that we can help address in the backcountry with our volunteers. Our anecdotal evidence said that yes, use has increased certainly since COVID. I think most of the numbers I've seen said that the increase sort of spiked, if you will, or reached a new plateau in 20 when people had been cooped up that whole winter and early spring. This is anecdotal. I didn't see that grow again in 21, but saw it stay at that level, certainly. And to some of Maggie's comments earlier, the things we're seeing in the backcountry, probably evident of new users in the backcountry, poor management of human waste, the proliferation and spreading of new campsites and new impacts on the ground. We're also noticing new uses that's been discussed here, certainly pack rafting in places like the South Fork of the Flathead, where we're trying to manage for wilderness values for those who are going up the trail and managing for wild and scenic, outstanding, remarkable values for those who are floating down the South Fork. And then also paying attention to stuff like drone use in the wilderness is certainly something that's going on. Trends in our community, in our volunteer community, we're noticing this. Our volunteers are getting slightly younger. I think our average age now is now below 60, and also is starting to tilt in the female direction. I think last year 55% of our volunteers were female. There were several of our trips, both intentionally and not intentionally, that were all female. So we are definitely seeing some trends in that direction. We're also noticing that folks are more interested in our shorter trips, our 5-day trips, as opposed to like our 9-day trips. And then I guess lastly, as I run out of time here, I would also note at a national level, a trend that I am growing concerned about is the wilderness idea and the wilderness concept sort of being attacked on all sides. It's always been not super popular with those uses that are maybe prohibited in wilderness, like mechanized and motorized use. But I'm also noticing, including those in our wilderness community, those who are starting to water down the wilderness idea a little bit as we rightfully start to wrestle with the history of our public lands and the history of the Wilderness Act and how it fits in the context of recognizing Native rights on these lands, Native histories on these lands, and current Native issues on these lands. And so that's something I'm noticing a little bit that concerns me, is that we're not upholding some of those values. And it's something that's pretty precious to me. I consider myself not just an executive director, but also a practitioner of the Wilderness Act. And it's something that I think we ought to be paying attention to. Is we've got 112 million acres of wilderness across this country, including this 1.5 million acres we care so deeply about. And protecting those values and making sure they don't get watered down is pretty important. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. And our last panel member, and although I don't think we planned it this way, but we started with an outfitter and we're going to end with an outfitter in terms of the panel's comments. But last but not least, and surely someone that could, maybe you'll have a poem for us at the end since you're so well known for that, Jack. Anyways, we have Jack Rich.
Oh, you're muted, Jack.
You're on mute, Jack.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
All right. See how that works? So first thing I'd like to do is say kudos to the presenters that came before me. They addressed a whole range of issues and ideas and thoughts and trends that I think that are relative to a lot of us. So thanks for what you've done. I'm going to start my presentation the way I'm going to end my presentation. in wandering through the hills since I've been a boy, I figured out one thing. The only constant in this world is change. And for those of us that think we can hold back the hands of time and prevent change, whether it's ecological or whether it's social, we're kidding ourselves. But having said that, there's ways that you can still work within that system to try to achieve your long-term goals. Our family started outfitting. We got our first permit in 1946 from the Forest Service. So we have about a 75-year perspective on working with the Forest Service to provide recreation. And that's a second generation business. So my father started outfitting to help supplement his cattle ranch and fell in love with the outdoors, found out that he loved packing mules more than he loved cattle ranching. And we found our way into being outfitters and guides in backcountry areas. And so that was the environment I grew up in. But we also got to watch the evolution of conservation as it pertained to our public lands. The original trails and routes that we first started following were old Native American indigenous routes for access to hunt, game trails, and a network of trail system that the Forest Service built primarily to fight for fires. And that came along with about 1,500 miles of number 9 wire that connected all their own phone system. And so we predated the Wilderness Act by nearly 20 years. And we got to watch that evolution of sorts. And that was the world that I grew up in as a young boy, watching. I went into the Bob Marshall for several years before it was designated by Congress as the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and then watched the emergence of the Forest Service as they tried to figure out what that meant. Meanwhile, outside the wilderness on the national forest around us, the primary function was timber harvest and logging, and there was a whole network of thousands of miles of roads that were built primarily for that purpose. Well, the fire trails, the Native American trails, the game trails, and the logging roads then emerged as the primary access to go in and recreate. And the Forest Service gave little or no attention to it. It was just, they were in the business of fighting fires and cutting trees, and everything else. Recreation was just kind of this thing that was off their radar screen. Well, fast forward into the environmental movement of the 70s, and things changed drastically as the baby boomers decided that that wasn't right. So then we're trying to figure out how to modify and change our ways, both outfitters as well as general recreationists, to these emerging new laws and regulations and rules. And the Forest Service is trying to figure out how to make that happen too, and try to adapt and change. And the Forest Service, as much as I respect them, they are a very, 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 very large ship. And you don't just spin a ship on a dime. And so there were some hard bumps in the roads, and there were efforts. I got to be part of an effort in the early 80s that the Forest Service, one of their first reactions is just to put a hard carrying capacity, take an arbitrary number and say that's how many people will do X, Y, and Z. And in an effort to find something more creative, there was a handful of people that assembled to look at a more flexible, dynamic tool. And the result of that was the limits of acceptable change, which Steve McCool is on this forum too. And Steve and I think, are probably the only two here that were part of that effort. And the idea with limits of acceptable change is that we would be dynamic, and we would let the stewardship of the resource dictate the amount of people and the type of people that would use the resource in the Bob Marshall. And to some degree, LAC has tried to adapt it into places outside the wilderness too, not necessarily under the framework of LAC, but with the same guiding principles, that the better we care for the resource, the more opportunities there are. And so as you walk through that process, you realize just what a challenge we face, because as people age, the thing that they resent the most is change. They lament and reflect on the good old days, and the good old days were the best ones. And the longer you go, the whole world's going to pot and there's nothing left. Well, I tend to be more of a positive person, and I believe that we can make that change. When I started as a young boy, I saw my dad's role as an outfitter and guide. He was an outfitter and guide. And I was able to purchase my dad's and my mom and dad's guiding business when I was in my early 20s. And I had an aha moment. And I said, you know what? I don't think I'm an outfitter anymore. I think I'm a recreational service provider. And then in the early 80s, the leadership of the Forest Service came up with a concept that my dad helped establish called the partnership concept, where the permittees that worked with the Forest Service were partners with the Forest Service in fulfilling the mission of the Forest Service, and that is to care for the resource and serve the people. And when in doubt, you go back to square one. What was our major purpose? To care for the resource and serve the people. So what outfitters, in my mind, have become is an extension of that mission, where we help people that don't have the skills and equipment to be able to enjoy the great outdoors. So my wife and I, in the process of being outfitters, expanded into dude ranching and guest ranching about 30 years ago. And we have a very small guest ranch by guest ranch standards, but we have expanded to be able to provide other services that we saw as emerging. So in our guest ranch, we have traditional horseback rides, we have fishing, we have hunting, but now we also have mountain bikes. And in the wintertime, we have snowmobiles. And people will tell me who are strong wilderness advocates, they said, well, you can't be an advocate of wilderness and ride snowmobiles. I said, yes, you can, as long as you do it in the right places. And so it's important for us, I think, all to look and say change is inevitable. And I don't want to be the person who vilifies mountain bikers or ATVers or fill in the blanks, new emerging uses. The small little float craft, and all of those things. But I just think that we always need to take a look and figure out a way to integrate them into the resource so that you still have respect for existing uses. You still have that idea that there's enough room in here for all of us, but we need to respect each other's uses, and that you'll have a wide range of opportunities, whether it's on national parks or national forests or provincial lands or private lands or designated wilderness. There's a whole range of ways to do that and keep people involved in a way that the great outdoors are relevant and that they mean something, and they're not just something to use. But the best part about being outdoors is not what you kill, capture, or conquer, but how it makes you feel. Those intrinsic rewards should be the common denominator that we use as we try to help people enjoy public land. So it shouldn't be how fast you can travel from point A to point B, or how many fish you can catch, or all those things. It's about making sure that the intrinsic rewards become the driving force that help us with that. So I will leave with a short poem, as long as Mike gave me that liberty. My dad wrote poetry, and he was a gifted person far beyond my rudimentary ways. But I found a couple of poems that I modified to make one that reflects the life that I have been fortunate and privileged enough to live as a recreation service provider. And it's based more around our life with horses and packing in the mountains. But it goes, why do you do it? Someone asked. The money doesn't pay. The work is hard. The hours long. Why do you live this way? What makes you choose this mountain life? A life of dust and heat. A life of sitting on your horse in rain and snow and sleet. Well, I pondered on it for a spell, and I answered that I thought. I did it because of things like or what a cowboy's got. I like the way my saddle feels. I like my old wool coat. I like the sound my horse makes when he's munching on his oats. I really like tight leather gloves and wrangling in the spring. Well, I'd rather hear a bugling bull than hear a choir sing. You know, I've thought it over, and it's pretty plain to see that all the things that cowboys got they're good enough for me. So hats off to all of us who have this passion for the great outdoors, from east to west, from north to south. I think the best thing about the crown of the continent is one of the things that people mistakenly do is that we put artificial boundaries on landscapes that shouldn't have them. And so for us having this large landscape that we collectively try to steward, is a grand and noble thing. And we should keep working towards it, and we should keep having these kind of gatherings. And so for those of you that do it, hats off to you. Yeehaw.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for bringing the panel home. Excellent. And on the note of what Jack was talking about, we have about 25 minutes before we have Forrest talk about limits of acceptable change. On the note of partners and working together, and the whole idea behind the Crown Managers Partnership in not necessarily taking over one another's jurisdictional responsibilities, but in sharing and trying to do the greater good for current and present or present and future generations. I'd like to start off with a general question for our panelists. And you have a lot of managers that are signed up for this particular session over the next 4 days. And what is it that if you had an opportunity for the number one priority that you would like to see help in recreation management, whether it be from the economic standpoint or the visitor standpoint or the protected area standpoint, or just helping to develop different recreational opportunities, and whether it be volunteerism or your industry, what is it that you would share with managers across the Crown?
Yes, I'll start, Mike.
All right.
Was something that I spoke to all the district rangers last week about, or maybe that was earlier this week. It's all run together. But I think partnership is awfully important, whether that's partnering with an outfitter or with a group coalition like Brad's group or a nonprofit like ours and the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation. I think partnership is very, very important because it allows us to engage the public in a dialogue instead of a monologue. And we get to hear and taste that sort of feedback from them on what their experience is like and how our messages can maybe help influence behaviors. But what partnership is not is a substitute for a well-funded federal or state or provincial workforce. I think that's, all too often I hear the line, oh, well, we'll use our partners for that. And just the word use is, it's derogatory, like, oh, well, we can't get to it, so we'll use our partners to get to it. And I know I wish right now I'm speaking to an audience of elected officials because that's who needs to hear this. But partnerships is a nice addition to a well-funded, well-rounded workforce that actually has the land and management responsibilities, again, whether it be federal or state or provincial governments. So I think that's just one thing is approaching it from that way, and then also approaching on our side, approaching the partnership as a shoulder-to-shoulder relationship, where we're standing side by side, looking at a problem and solving it together instead of looking at each other, yelling about how to fix the problem. And I think that's pretty important. We sort of look at our role as working with and not on. A lot of partners work on federal land or work on state land. We prefer to look that we work with federal land managers for the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. So that's my little answer to that.
Thank you, Bill. Any other thoughts from the panel to share on that?
Hey, Mike,
Yeah,
I'll just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to see is the decision makers, whatever form of government it is, actually recognize that the backcountry and wilderness have other values that have values that are as important as resource extraction. It's not always resource extraction. Some trees are actually worth more standing, and parks are not holding areas for development. They have a purpose as a park, so they need to stay as a park.
Right.
I would say there's values back there, Brad, too, that are also more important than recreation.
Absolutely.
Which sometimes we forget to acknowledge.
I agree with you 100%, Bill. It's just trying to figure out, really, it's about land management.
Jason, are you going to jump in there?
Yeah, I think I'm a big proponent of like collaboration, working together with the land managers. I think, you know, the land managers have a responsibility for their unique jobs, their you know, their oath to the land and to the water. And we as recreational users or recreational user groups, you know, we have an ability to support them and an ability to communicate well and come up with some unique solutions to some challenges. And I think working together is important. No is an acceptable answer going in either direction. And I think as long as you have respectful conversation, you can usually get somewhere.
All right, thank you, Jason. So if let's see about how much time we have. About 20 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and, oh, I see a hand up, but I'm going to go ahead and keep asking questions. But I'd also invite the rest of the participants in the forum to go ahead and post any questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you. And right now I saw that Jackie had your hand up first, and then we'll come to you next, Mo. And Jack, you're on mute again.
Okay, I can't figure this stuff out. Come on, work with me, Mike. You know that most of the time we spend on the trail. So anyhow, I said that I started my presentation with what I wanted to end it with, and that is the one constant in this world is change. And that's the challenge that all of us see here as we don't resent change, but we face change head on. And we try to figure out how to adapt the land and the landscape policies that we have to protect those things most dear to us while still allowing those other folks. Our great outdoors will only be relevant as the people see it as relevant. And if we make it as something that can't be valued, it will become devalued, and then we will lose that. And so we're looking to try to make that happen in a way that's meaningful. And it was like I was talking about with the infrastructure that we inherited during the early days of the environmental movement consisted of all of those trails and all of the road system that really had no relevance to recreation. I think I see that as an opportunity still to this date. We're still trying to figure out how to do that. And I think there's the transportation system can be looked at in a way that provide those opportunities, as someone said earlier, for one-way mountain biking trails or for things similar to that wouldn't even have been considered just a short time ago. And I think we need to be innovative and creative and take a look at those things and try to walk into it with an open eye and try to. There was a time when somebody told me that the success of a collaboration hinged on two key pieces. One was empathy, the ability to listen to people whose views you do not agree with an open eye and an open ear, and not be looking to form your rebuttal, but just listen. The other is integrity, that you go into it with honesty and you're not trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. And I think that if we continue to approach that with those two principles in mind, collaboratives can move forward. And when little people get together and find a sweet spot, when little people get together and can find a sweet spot of agreement, big things can happen. So I would encourage us all to work towards that end.
Thank you, Jack. And Mo Essen, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi, I'll go ahead and turn my camera on. Thanks for having this opportunity to connect. I'll just quickly introduce myself and then I'll jump to my question. I am the regional social scientist for the National Forest Service. I sit in Missoula, so I work for the northern region. I only have been in this position for a few months since the beginning of January. So I'm still, trying to figure out exactly what my job is and, kind of just get to know everybody. So again, hello, nice to meet you. Please reach out to me anytime. I'll drop my email in the chat when I'm done as well. So in case anyone wants to reach out, please feel free. So I really had a question mostly, I think, for Maggie, but anyone is of course welcome to answer. And just wanted to say, Maggie, it was really great to hear your perspective. I feel like it's a perspective that I don't hear very often. So I really appreciated that. And I wanted to, if I could, pick your brain for just a minute on, and Jack just spoke a lot about, the only thing that is constant is change, right? And so as we all know, the Forest Service, every year there's like a new policy priority or initiative or something like that. And keeping up on these things is kind of a little ridiculous, ridiculously challenging, I should say. So one of the newer ones that we have coming down is called Justice 40, and it's an administrative priority where essentially the idea is to take 40% of certain program investments, and which programs are going to be subject to this Justice 40 initiative are still being worked out within the agency. But anyway, it would be 40% of certain programs within the agency would have to spend their money essentially supporting non-traditional partners or underserved communities, or however you would like to phrase that. I realize that calling a community an underserved community or disenfranchised community is not necessarily something that they want to hear. So anyhow, I'm just kind of curious, in the system of pay to play, as you mentioned, would you envision, someone like the Forest Service as a technically well-resourced agency compared to a lot of NGOs and small businesses, supporting those communities as it relates to this new initiative around Justice 40 that's really getting at justice and equity among communities out there?
There you go. Hi, Mo. Thanks. That was a good question. And I know it's kind of a hot topic for people to pay for their activity. And what I simply meant by that is like this broader scale idea that when someone buys ammunition or if they buy fishing equipment, there's a tax on it, and that goes to supporting certain conservation efforts. And you don't see that in the hiking or riding realm. There's not like a tax on it. And so I can't say, I think that X, Y, and Z should happen. I just think there should be a conversation, and I think there is, around like ways to fund, our federal land agencies and help management and come from the people that are using them. As far as equity, that is a hard one. And so I don't know exactly how that would happen. I would say just as a way for it to be diffused across as many people as possible, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question? I don't know.
Well, I think the clarification was really helpful too. So I appreciate that point. That makes a lot of sense to me. Did anyone else have anything to add?
So I think we see Bill Hodge has his hand up, and knowing that Bill has worked so much for diversity and inclusion this last couple of years, be interesting for your response, Bill.
Yeah, just wanted to respond to that, Mo. I think it's interesting to the idea of Justice 40, like you applying a specific number to it, but the work has to be intentional, and it has to allow us to break down traditional barriers. We're doing work, what we call our Wild Connections program, where we're trying to make sure that we reach underrepresented communities in the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. And here that means tribal communities, and reach them in a way that doesn't involve just inviting them to come be a part of what we do in the Bob, but go and be a part of their community programs and Browning or Pueblo or Ronan and that sort of thing. But also it's going to require the agency to look at our relationship a little bit differently, and that some of our programming in the Bob isn't just getting trail work done or weeds work done, that some of our work is to just create the introductions and removing some of the barriers for certain communities to having those experiences. We still want to introduce the idea of stewardship, because that's what we are at our core as an organization, is a stewardship partner. But we would be creating the pipeline of future stewards and future advocates for public lands in our Wilderness 101 affinity trips that we're doing now, where we're partnering with a group like Here Montana out of Missoula, and other organizations like that, the Latino Outdoors chapter in the state of Montana, and creating those connections. But there's just a real intentionality that goes into it. And it requires us all to sort of think about relationships differently. Like I said, it even requires our relationship with the Forest Service to be thought about slightly differently. We're not trying to behave like an outfitter. We're not just like doing trips to do trips. We're certainly not charging people to do trips, but we are starting to think about what is one of the barriers to somebody participating in one of our trips might literally be their intimidation about thinking that they're going to have to use a tool that they've never even seen before. So maybe we create a trip in which that isn't a psychological barrier, if you will. And of course, us intentionally doing that work, we're already seeing our numbers change from a volunteer base that was, like 99% white, to actually reflecting more of the population, and not just in Montana, but of the country as a whole too. So I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, Mo, but there is a lot of intentional work to be done to make that work happen, and it requires us to think differently.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And I just want to just say that one of the things I'm working on within the region is trying to boost that understanding of the need for supporting more diverse relationships, and for the agency to find ways to do that. So I'm happy to hear from any of you, so please do reach out. I'd love to form a relationship and see what we can do together. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mo. And just a reminder that if folks want to ask questions in the chat, and they could be read, if you don't feel like jumping on the air and stating them, go on ahead and do that. And I don't see any more hands right now, so I'm going to ask a little more specific questions of some of our panelists. Unless I see some hands jump up, that's the route I'm going to probably take. And Amanda, I was wondering, in your presentation, it seemed like there was a little more emphasis on day use biking, mountain biking, from locations like in Helena. There's a lot of routes around the town of Helena down here in Montana. And that's what it seemed like the focus was of your talk. Is there more desire for overnight type trips with bicycles, or those type of trips?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's something I know probably a little bit less about. And probably as a bike club, we sort of, I think, seek to talk to people who are closer to town and stuff, and maybe don't know quite as much about that realm of things, like more the bike packing kind of thing. But I do think that is kind of a growing population of bikers as well. And I think it's probably something that's a little less noticeable maybe than what we're noticing, like the crowds right outside of town we notice, where maybe there's probably a lot more people getting out there on bike packing trips as well, that are sort of still smaller crowds, so not quite as noticeable, but also spending more time out there. It is something I've noticed spending time, especially in the castle parks, people sort of biking old quad trails and things like that and making multi-day trips out of it. So that's definitely a growing demand as well.
I've been wondering about that. And Jason, we haven't discussed so far in our panels talking about climate change. And I know ski areas, that's probably one of the big concerns. Have you had any of your skier visitors expressing concerns about that, or have you started to see that just emulating itself in how you're managing your ski resort?
I think skiers in general are pretty big advocates for climate change. I mean, it's a reality. I mean, people can argue whether or not it's man-made or how much of it's man-made, but the reality is the climate's changing. So, we need to figure out a way around that. Some things we've done here at Castle, we didn't have snowmaking, or very little snowmaking. We've since put in a very large snowmaking system. And now we're starting to work with some environmental groups and some university groups on trying to understand how glading on the mountain can affect the size of the snow pillow, and whether or not there's a synergy there of, ideal spacing on ski trails that could create a bigger snow pillow, which would then create more runoff or slow down the runoff, but have more runoff in the rivers, which would be great for irrigators further downriver from us, better for the nature or the health of the river. Just with snowmaking alone, when we make snow on the mountain, we are using water for sure. I mean, it's definitely a reality of it. The majority of that water does flow back to where it came from, and it flows back slower, so it keeps the rivers cooler longer, which is great. So there's definitely the climate change side of things is near and dear to the heart, and it's also something that's top of mind.
You would have liked to have been in last year's fire forum that the CMP put on, talking about water and snowpack for sure.
Yeah, there's a group out of University of Lethbridge that does LiDAR for this area, and they're studying the snowpack. So we're hoping to work with them to learn more about like specifically for the castle how it's working. So
exactly, and thank you, Lynn. I'll get to you after I ask one more question of Maggie. Maggie, you operate primarily out of our district. Where you're permit administrator, so I get to see your itineraries that you have, and I'm not surprised to see now that it took only 1 minute to get all your trips booked, which is amazing. But one thing that I think I've noticed, is you don't necessarily go to all the places that everyone else goes to, and tell me more about that.
So I think partially it's that we ourselves like to go different places and have different itineraries, and we have returning clients who don't like, they don't want to do the same trip after trip. I think partially it's because we have fewer number of stock, so we can camp in a different area. But I think that as a business, we really want to show people the really wild side, I guess I should say, of the Bob. Like the Chinese wall gets a lot of the press, but there's so many places that are equally as beautiful, and it is a way of dispersing use too. Not that that's like our main idea, but we do like to go to areas where there are less people, because I feel like our clients have more of a wilderness experience.
Excellent. And I see that Lynn, you have a question, hands up, and we have about 3 more minutes before we get into forest molt. So Lynn, do you have your hand up, or did you take it down?
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, it's Lynn. I have to unmute 2 things. I'm Lynn Huang. I'm the Regional Inventory Monitoring Assessment and Climate Change Coordinator for the Forest Service in Missoula, Montana. I'm also the co-chair of the Crown Managers Partnership. So I want to thank everyone for attending and thank everyone for all their time in participating in this forum in the next couple of days. I'm so excited about the rest of this week. I had a question for really anyone from this panel or the last panel. I heard a lot about use changes and increase in use, and we're really getting ready to get more people, and we need to accept this change and be ready and get ahead of it. But I'm also wondering if we are also the managers and the outfitters are also thinking about something that Maggie actually just said, is about clients who actually want to have more solitude and who don't want to see this change, who don't want more people, they don't want to see more cars, but want to go to a place and know that they can go and park and not have to worry about something. They want to go to a place and walk down a trail and know they're not going to hear someone else also bugle for elk. So are we thinking about those types of users as we also think about the changes that we know are coming, and can we also accommodate for that type of use?
I think from Castle Mountain Resort's point of view, I think I mentioned that we're not Disneyland, and we're hoping to never become a Disneyland. For us, the growth of our business, what we want is to be sustainable. And sustainable is that we can continue to employ people, we can continue to operate, we can continue to reinvest in our company, and then also at the same time by being sustainable within the environment. So that's how we look at it.
Thank you. Any other responses to Lynn's question? Jack, it looks like you have your hand up. And then just before you start, Jack, this will be the last answer to any questions, so that we maintain on time because we've been through folks' lunch hour, but you do have the chat that you can direct any questions to folks, and then I'll be handing it off to Holly or Dana afterwards.
Yes, I would say to answer that question about being able to have more dispersed use, one of the challenges, and Mike, you're very aware of it, is that oftentimes the Forest Service only has the budget to clear the main pipeline trails, and secondary trails and those places that are less often used are hard to get into and unreliable. If you start up there with a group and you find that there was a windfall and nobody's been up there, then there you are in the middle of a downfall, especially in the post-fire era, or in the live fire era, I should say. And so I think there are desires to do that, but sometimes it doesn't always bear fruit because the only places you can get to are the ones that have already been cleared out. And so I see that as a challenge, but also an opportunity to figure out if we can address those and have more of that country accessible.
Excellent. So that brings our panel discussion to a close for our industry and user groups and volunteers. And I will be handing it off to Dana or Holly.